You mentioned this right off the bat, Ross. Nebraska is a big-time story at this point. 2 dominant wins, 2 good performances from the freshman QB, Dylan Raiola. Are we officially at the point where we need to adjust the expectations for what this season will be in Lincoln?
Well, I think coming into the season, there were pretty high expectations. You had Matt Rule in year 2. If you look at his track record, that's when he's really started to take a program to the next level. In the second year, you had Dylan Raiola, obviously true freshman. The buzz coming out of camp was big. So the expectation was pretty high. And I think a lot of folks, Nebraska was their kind of sleeper pick, right, to potentially challenge in the league and challenge for maybe even getting to that 9-10 win mark and challenging for the playoff. And now I just think the expectations are even more heightened, right? Especially when you look at not just Raiola, right? And the offense has been great, but look at what the defense has done in 2 games. 8 sacks, I think tied for the second most in the conference. They pressured quarterbacks on basically 1/3 of dropbacks, according to the Pro Football Focus numbers. That's pretty incredible. Are the black shirts back? It sure feels like it. 2 touchdowns in 2 games.
And I wouldn't say Matt Rule went full like Kurt Cignetti since the game, but there's an additional kind of bravado that I think he carries into the now Nebraska being 2-0 for the first time in nearly a decade, beating Colorado for the first time in well over a decade. There's at least some accomplishment at this point that now Matt Rule can say, here's tangible evidence, here's some proof of concept for what I've done at multiple other stops before now. That being said, I completely agree with Ross's point that there were a lot of outside folks who did have big expectations for this team, but it's not a foreign situation to this program, though. I mean, the previous regime under Scott Frost had several seasons they went in with big expectations because the previous year would feel like, oh, there's these near misses, or, well, if it wasn't for that special teams gaffe, or whoops, we turned it over late and we lost a key game. That was the story of Matt Rule's first season, but he went through the offseason. He and his team have done the work. And now through 2 games, it does look like this is a different Nebraska squad. So my expectations, we're taking a bit of a wait-and-see approach through 2 games. Thoroughly impressed with what we've seen from the Huskers so far, but can they sustain it? That's still a question I have, Mike.
Right. We're only 2 games in, but here's one stat that I think helps the turnaround. 31 lost turnovers last year.
Right.
Worst in the country. 1 through 8 quarters this season.
Huge.
It's a huge, big difference. You can't stay in games if you're turning the ball over, and through a small sample size, they've been great. To the point that their little graphic, Ross, has a 23 next to it. They're ranked for the first time in 5 years.
Yeah, incredible. You mentioned that turnover rate. I think their total turnover margin last year was like something absurd. It was one of the worst in the nation. I think when it was like -17 or -15. So you knew that had to improve, and so far so good, securing the ball. And hey, look at that schedule, guys. They will be favored in every game until Ohio State. So could you imagine a 7-0 Nebraska playing at the Buckeyes in Columbus?
There's been a bunch of folks who've been imagining that for a little while, and now you get through the Colorado game, the rivalry game that, frankly, they out-physicaled Colorado last season, too. But there were those turnovers. There was the offensive inefficiency. And now with this true freshman QB and Dylan Raiola, that's the thing that stands out to me about him as much as anything. Yes, there are some pretty passes. There's some impressive nuance to the way he throws the football, but there's a composure to the way he carries himself on the field. There is this confidence, and he doesn't try to get outside himself too much. He's played with such efficiency in protecting the football so far that you wouldn't necessarily anticipate a freshman stepping into his first college football atmosphere would be able to protect the football at a higher level than veterans who'd been behind center for the Huskers over the last handful of years. But that's who he's been, and there were so many expectations. He's handled them as well as he could.
As a fan of college football, it is so fun to see that fan base.
Yeah.
The 80,000 just going nuts and having a reason to go nuts. And the fact that they could have that throughout October, maybe getting to 7-0 at some point, it's just really fun if you're a fan of the sport.